I suppose Max Steiner is known by aficionados today as the father of film music. And the reason that that title has been ascribed to him is because he was really in at the very beginning when film music began properly in America. Sound films really became a technical possibility in 1927 with Vitaphone and Warner Brothers, but it took a couple of years before sound on film became the norm with the William Fox process. And Steiner had been working in New York in the musical theatre, conducting operettas and shows there. And he'd come originally from London, having been born in Vienna, of course, and been very well connected as part of a very famous Viennese family. And he was really the complete musician. He could turn his hand to anything. And when William Fox decided to film Rio Rita, a very popular musical show in New York, Steiner went with the show to Hollywood to arrange the music and to conduct it on camera, because in those days there was no post-dubbing facility. It all had to be done live. And he made such an impact at RKO and William Fox Pictures that he was invited to stay, and he stayed on there, and that's where he stayed for the rest of his life in his career. And initially he was working in musicals, strictly speaking. He wasn't doing background film music, because that really did not start to happen until about 1932. And it was largely as a result of Max Steiner's gift in just providing, largely at David O. Selznick's request, to put in some mood music occasionally when a film was particularly slow. And A Bill of Divorcement, I think, was the first one he did this. He also did a film called The Most Dangerous Game, which was like a forerunner of King Kong. Now, King Kong is really the first film where a symphonic film score made a dramatic impact, not only on the film, but on the audience. And that came about simply because Selznick and Marion C. Cooper and Ernst B. Schoedsack realized that King Kong was not an ordinary film. It needed a completely different approach. And there's a very funny story, which I'll tell you briefly, about the head of the studio, RKO, who was very alarmed at the cost of this film because there were so many special effects and making the huge ape appear to move and so on. And he said, we can't spend any money on music. He said, let's just use some tracks from the library we already have. And Steiner said, use tracks from the library? How many films have you made with a huge 8-foot ape? And so the story goes that Ernst B. Schoedsack said, look, Max, do whatever you want. Put music where you think it should go, and I will pay for the orchestra. And that's what happened. And in fact, then they had a preview of the film. He did just a couple of sequences like that. They had a preview of the film for critics and for invited guests. And people laughed in the wrong places at the ape. And Selznick said, look, we've got to define the mood of this film very specifically. Otherwise, it will appear to be a comedy. So then Steiner went ahead and scored nearly all the picture with his famous King Kong music. And it really had a tremendous impact. But even so, you'd think that every studio then would want lavish symphonic film scores. Not at all. Steiner went back to scoring Fred Astaire and Ginger Roger musicals. And he didn't really get another chance to write an important film score until The Lost Patrol for John Ford. Incidentally, the main title of that film he reused 10 years later for Casablanca. He was a great self-borrower. And gradually he started to create his own sound in films, but it wasn't until 1935 and the arrival of Erich Wolfgang Korngold that really he, I think, came of age as a composer, because Korngold brought a completely different technique to film scoring. He brought the technique of the opera composer. And Steiner and everybody working in the medium were incredibly impressed by the impact of Korngold's score for Captain Blood in 1935. And if you look at Steiner's work before that and then afterwards, you see immediately the potent impact that Korngold and other Viennese, well, he was born in Brno, but to all intents and purposes he was Viennese, he grew up here, had on his approach to filming. Now, people often ask me, did Steiner and Korngold know each other before Hollywood? Well, I think it's unlikely, in that Steiner had left Vienna already, I think, by 1913, when Korngold was just starting his career. It's possible that Steiner would have known of Korngold the Wunderkind, but I don't think socially they had ever met. But in Hollywood, being emigres together, they quickly became friends. And also, to a certain extent, rivals, because, of course, the Plum films at Warner Brothers were given either to Korngold or to Steiner, with the exception that Korngold had the most luxurious contract ever given to a film composer, whereas Steiner was a staff composer. In other words, he got a salary by the week, and he worked 52 weeks of the year and had to score whatever films were given to him. Korngold could choose his films. He only had to score 2 or 3 films a year. He was the first composer to have his name on the screen as a single title card and penultimate to the director. Up until that point, if the composer was named at all on the screen, he was in a long list of all the other technicians who were contributing to the film. And Korngold also could decide where the music went in the film, and also he retained ownership of the music he wrote for films for his own use. So he was given really carte blanche by the studio, whereas poor Max had to churn out film after film. And it's a testament to his genius, I think, that he was able to maintain such an incredibly high standard and high quality of music in spite of being effectively in a factory situation. And you know, I've talked to many old-timers in the 70s who worked at the studio, in the orchestra and in the music department there at Warner Brothers, and they all said, you know, he couldn't put the pencil down. He was always composing something, writing things down, having ideas. He was a born composer in that respect, and he had an incredibly keen and innate dramatic sense. Betty Davis once said that he knew more about drama and acting and pacing than any of the actors in the studio. He knew just where to put the music to pick up the action. He also had a divine melodic gift, and many of the themes he wrote for films have since been turned into popular songs.